There are certain works that resonate not because they align with our tastes, but because they challenge them, because they take a genre, an aesthetic, or a narrative tradition we might otherwise resist and shape it into something unexpectedly intimate, compelling, and deeply affecting. The Wolf Among Us is one such piece of work. On paper, it is steeped in noir, rain-slicked streets, moral ambiguity, wary protagonists, and a pervasive sense of decay that clings to every alleyway and dimly lit office. There are elements that, for many, carry an immediate allure, a shorthand for gritty sophistication and existential weight. Yet for others, those who do not naturally gravitate towards noir, who find its aesthetics overwrought or its cynicism alienating, such trappings might initially feel distant, even uninviting. And yet, The Wolf Among Us possesses a peculiar power. It compels affection, not despite its noir identity, but because of it, transforming genre convention into emotional substance in a way that is truly difficult to resist. What makes this especially striking is that The Wolf Among Us does not dilute noir to broaden its appeal, nor does it romanticize it into something sleek or fashionable. Instead, it fully embraces noir at its most raw and functional, using the genre not as an aesthetic costume, but as a narrative engine, one that fuels characters, themes, and atmosphere with an almost ruthless consistency. For someone not predisposed to love noir, this could easily become alienating, and yet paradoxically it becomes the very reason the game works. The noir framework does not exist to glorify cool detachment or stylish misery. It exists to expose vulnerability, regret, and moral fatigue, grounding a fantastical premise in something profoundly human. At its core, The Wolf Among Us is a story about displacement, identity, and the slow erosion of idealism. Its world of exiled fairy tale characters, forced to survive in the shadows of a modern city that neither understands nor cares for them, could easily have leaned into whimsy or nostalgia. Instead, the game frames this existence through noir's lens of disillusionment, transforming familiar myths into figures burdened by compromise, secrecy, and quiet despair. This is not noir as a spectacle, but noir as necessity, a language uniquely suited to articulating the emotional reality of a world where magic has faded and survival demands constant negotiation with loss. For someone who does not instinctively love noir, The Wolf Among Us becomes a revelation, not because it makes noir more palatable, but because it reveals why noir exists in the first place. It demonstrates how the genre at its best is not about trenchcoats or shadows, but about people navigating systems that are indifferent, corrupt, or simply broken. In doing so, it transforms noir from an aesthetic preference into an emotional experience, one that lingers precisely because it was never expected to resonate so deeply. To approach The Wolf Among Us without a fondness for noir is to enter the experience with a certain skepticism, a quiet expectation that its stylistic choices will feel excessive, performative, or emotionally distancing. Noir, after all, has a reputation. It is often associated with stylized cynicism, with worlds so steeped in moral decay that sincerity genuinely feels out of place. For those who prefer warmth, clarity, or emotional openness in storytelling, noir can feel like a closed door, an aesthetic that prioritizes cool detachment over genuine connection. The Wolf Among Us initially seems poised to reinforce these assumptions, opening on rain-soaked streets, muted color palettes, and a protagonist whose very posture communicates exhaustion and guarded restraint. And yet something begins to shift almost immediately. The noir elements are undeniably present, but they do not feel ornamental. They feel functional, even inevitable. The grime of the city is not there to look stylish, it reflects the lived reality of Fabletown, a place where once mythic beings now exist as refugees, stripped of the grandeur and moral certainty that once defined them. This reframing is crucial. Noir does not dominate the narrative, it serves it, becoming a visual and tonal shorthand for the erosion of magic and meaning that defines the characters' lives. Bigby Wolf himself embodies this tension. He is not a glamorous noir detective, nor a romantic anti-hero. He is tired, volatile, and painfully aware of his own past reputation. His struggle to not appear cool or detached, but to remain functional, to hold together a fragile sense of order in a world that continually reminds him of his past failures, an inherent monstrosity. For someone uninterested in noir archetypes, Bigby becomes compelling precisely because he subverts them. His cynicism is not performative, it is defensive. His silence is not mysterious, it is wary. The noir framing does not elevate him into myth, it traps him in consequence. This distinction matters. Rather than asking the player to admire noir's aesthetic, The Wolf Among Us asks them to inhabit its emotional logic. The shadows and muted colors are not invitations to revel in darkness, but reminders of constraint of a world where transparency is dangerous and trust is scarce. The game's refusal to soften this reality becomes its truly greatest strength. For those who do not love noir, it offers something rarer, an honest exploration of why such worlds need to exist, and why their inhabitants behave as they do. What truly distinguishes The Wolf Among Us is how seamlessly it merges fairy tale mythology with noir sensibilities, not as a gimmick, but as a thematic necessity. Fabletown is not merely a clever setting, it is a metaphor for exile, compromise, and the slow decay of idealism. Fairy tales traditionally are moral systems, stories where good and evil are clearly delineated, where justice, however delayed, is ultimately assured. Noir, by contrast, thrives on ambiguity, on the erosion of moral clarity, and on the recognition that systems rarely reward value. By placing fairy tale characters within a noir framework, The Wolf Among Us exposes the fragility of myth in the face of modern reality. For someone disinclined towards noir, this juxtaposition becomes unexpectedly powerful. The genre is no longer an aesthetic preference, it is the only language capable of articulating the tragedy that is Fabletown. These characters are not fallen because they are corrupt, they are worn down because the world demands it. Snow White's severity, Beauty and Beast's volatility, and Bigby's constant struggle for self-control are not genre tropes, they are survival mechanisms. Noir does not flatten these characters into archetypes, it sharpens them, revealing the cost of maintaining order in a world that offers no clean solutions. The city itself reinforces this logic. Fabletown is cramped, dim, and perpetually on edge. Its space is defined by secrecy and constraint. Unlike traditional fantasy settings, there is no sense of expansiveness or wonder. Everything feels enclosed, watched, and precarious. This spatial claustrophobia mirrors the psychological state of its inhabitants, reinforcing noir's core preoccupation with entrapment. For a player not drawn to noir's visual language, this environment nonetheless becomes emotionally legible. The discomfort it generates is not merely aesthetic, it is empathetic. In this way, The Wolf Among Us reframes noir as a vehicle for vulnerability rather than detachment. The genre's bleakness does not serve to alienate, it clarifies the stakes. When violence erupts, it is not shocking, it is inevitable. The culmination of pressures that have been simmering beneath the surface, the fairy tale elements heighten this effect, transforming familiar characters we all grew up with into embodiments of loss, regret, and adaptation. Noir here is not a stylistic indulgence, it is a truth-telling mechanism. One of noir's defining characteristics is its rejection of moral simplicity, and The Wolf Among Us embraces this principle with unsettling consistency. For players who prefer narratives with clear ethical signposts, this can feel initially disorienting. Choices rarely resolve cleanly, consequences ripple outward in unpredictable ways, and even well-intentioned actions can exacerbate harm. Yet it is precisely this discomfort that makes the experience resonate, especially for those not predisposed to enjoy noir's ethical murkiness. The game's decision-making mechanics are not designed to empower the player with control, but to confront them with limitation. Every choice feels compromised, constrained by incomplete information and conflicting priorities. This design philosophy aligns perfectly with noir's worldview. Agency exists, but it is always partial, always entangled with forces beyond individual control. Bigby's role as sheriff is not one of authority, but of mediation, attempting to manage damage rather than prevent it entirely. For someone skeptical of noir, this approach reframes the genre's pessimism as honesty. The game does not revel in despair, it acknowledges complexity. Characters behave inconsistently not because the narrative is cynical, but because people are inconsistent. Trust is provisional, justice is negotiated. These dynamics transform noir from an aesthetic of cool detachment into a framework for emotional realism. What makes this especially effective is how deeply the game ties moral ambiguity to character history. Bigby's past as the big bad wolf is not a footnote, it is a constant presence, shaping how others perceive him and how he perceives himself. Noir's fixation on identity and reputation becomes a means of exploring accountability and self-redefinition. The player is not asked to solve a mystery so much as to navigate a web of relationships strained by fear, resentment, and fragile hope. The Wolf Among Us stands as a rare example of a work that transcends genre preference, transforming noir from an acquired taste into an emotional necessity. For those who do not naturally gravitate towards the aesthetic or its conventions, the game offers not a compromise but a revelation that noir, when wielded with intention and restraint, is less about darkness and more about clarity. It is a genre uniquely equipped to explore displacement, moral ambiguity, and the quiet, persistent struggle to remain human in a world that offers little comfort. By embedding fairy tale characters within a noir framework, The Wolf Among Us strips myth of its certainty and replaces it with vulnerability, forcing both characters and players to confront the cost of survival without illusion. The result is an experience that lingers not because it is stylish, but because it is honest. It does not ask to be admired, it asks to be felt. For someone who does not love noir, The Wolf Among Us becomes proof that genre is not destiny. When executed with purpose, even the most unfamiliar or uninteresting of aesthetics can become profoundly moving. Noir here is not something to endure or tolerate, it is something to appreciate, precisely because it reveals truths that lighter frameworks cannot contain. In this way, The Wolf Among Us achieves something quietly extraordinary. It makes noir feel not like a preference, but like a language, one capable of expressing loss, resilience, and the fragile hope that persists even in the darkest corners of a world long past its fairy tale ending.